They deleted me from the family. Now they're guests in the house I built without them. Not out of spite, but out of purpose. If you've ever rebuilt your life without approval, if silence was your only reply, this story is yours too. Let them come. You don't owe them the door. The morning light filtered through the lakefront windows, slow and golden like a secret I no longer had to keep. My bare feet touched the hardwood floors I had sanded, stained, and chosen myself. The smell of cedar and espresso mingled in the air. Everything was still. Just the soft hum of the heating system and the occasional whisper of breeze slipping past the high glass panes. I stood at the edge of the foyer, a mug cradled in both hands, watching the sun rise across the water. Outside, the lake was still asleep, wrapped in morning fog. Inside, it was just me, my sculptures, and the quiet. That kind of quiet you earn, not inherit. They told me I'd never make it out of that one-bedroom apartment. They said I was unrealistic, too sensitive, too strange. But the one that stuck years later, like a splinter in my memory, was my mother's voice, calm and clinical over the phone. "You don't belong in places like that, Jolie." She had meant the gallery opening. But she also meant the city, the room, the table, the life. She always said things that way, soft like gauze, but sharp beneath. And now, here I was standing barefoot in the kind of house you see in architectural magazines. Lake view, double-height ceilings, a wall reserved solely for art, mine and others. And in the corner of the foyer, the sculpture I had welded from scrap and memory, a spiral of rusted steel knotted like a wound that healed wrong but healed anyway. I named it Inheritance. Naomi's laugh floated in from the kitchen, muffled by distance but threaded with joy. She was dancing to some soul song, probably barefoot, likely spinning in place like she always did when the coffee hit just right. This house was as much hers as it was mine. She called it post-emotional carnage, but make it chic. I took another sip, held it a second longer on my tongue. There was peace in that moment, not joy, not triumph. Just peace. The kind that settles in after a storm long past. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't an urgent ring. Not a frantic knock. Just a single chime, polite, almost hesitant. I froze. The mug in my hand suddenly felt heavier. I set it down on the console table beside a bowl of polished stones and turned toward the door, already knowing. Before I even checked the monitor, before I looked through the peephole, I knew. My stomach tightened, not from fear but from memory. Muscle memory. Emotional reflex. I walked slowly, as if stepping into a scene I hadn't rehearsed but always dreaded. I tapped the security screen. And there they were. My mother, Evelyn. My Aunt Diane. And Brandon, my older brother, the golden one. The one who used to call me art freak under his breath and laugh when I corrected his grammar. They stood on the porch like polite strangers. All pastels and pearls. Evelyn in an ivory coat with her signature string of pearls like armor. Diane clutching a gift bag from some boutique I once loved but could never afford. Brandon in his too perfect blazer, eyes darting like he wasn't sure if this was a reunion or an ambush. My past gift wrapped and standing on my porch. I didn't move. Naomi's footsteps echoed behind me, then paused just beyond the foyer wall. She didn't speak. Didn't ask. We didn't need words. We hadn't for years. I knew she was already recording quietly, just in case. I placed my hand on the doorknob. Just long enough to feel the cold metal ground me. Then I opened it. No words yet. Just that awful civilized silence they always brought with them. The kind that filled rooms during awkward dinners. The kind that screamed louder than arguments. "Well," Evelyn said at last, her voice coated in warmth like a polite poison. "Look at you, all grown up." Behind me, Naomi shifted. I could feel her holding back an eye roll. I offered no hug. No smile. No, it's been a long time. Just a simple, "Come in." I stepped aside. Let them walk through the threshold of the house they once said I wasn't built for. Evelyn's eyes scanned everything, each art piece, each vase, each custom fixture. She paused in front of Inheritance, tilted her head. "It's striking," she said. I didn't respond. She wanted a reaction. She'd have to beg for one. Diane offered the bag. Just a little something. Brandon's daughter picked it out. "She's considering art school, can you believe it?" I took the bag, set it down unopened. Brandon spoke next softly. This place is incredible, Jolie. Really. I didn't know you'd, come this far. Neither did you, I replied. The air shrank. Evelyn floated through the living room like a curator appraising an exhibit. It's nice to see you found your niche, she said. The city's changing fast, isn't it? I imagine your connections help developers love spots like this. Her tone was casual, her words weren't. Behind the foyer wall, Naomi tapped her foot once. The code, did you catch that? I nodded subtly. The moment stretched. No one addressed the elephant in the room, the years, the silence, the erasure. No one said why they had come. But I knew. They thought I'd forgotten. That success had softened the edges. That maybe now I'd be grateful they even showed up. They were wrong. I looked around my home, my sanctuary forged from rejection and resolve. And in that silence, I felt something powerful settle in my chest. Silence isn't absence. It's discipline. It's intention. It's the space between becoming and arrival. And today, I wasn't the girl they left behind. I was the woman who opened the door. It didn't happen all at once. That's what made it harder to name, harder to fight. If they had screamed at me, called me a disgrace, said I wasn't welcome anymore, maybe then it would have been easier to process. But no. They erased me the way wind erodes stone quietly over time, leaving no fingerprints. The first time I noticed something was off. It was a summer Thursday. I was checking emails between painting layers on a commissioned piece, something bright and abstract for a pediatrician's office. There were coupons, gallery, flyers, an overdue notice for student loans. Then a subject line caught my eye. Hail Family Reunion. Summer 2014. My heart didn't drop. It paused. I opened it. Long paragraphs about dates, activities, potluck assignment. Bring your best casserole. Don't forget sunscreen, a banner showing photos from last year, Brandon tossing a football, Grandma Evelyn holding a white parasol, Diane's cucumber sandwiches displayed like they belonged in a lifestyle magazine. I scrolled back up. Down again. Slowly. Then again faster. Nowhere in the text my name. Nowhere in the BCC line. No RSVP button directed to me. No. Let us know if you're around, Jolie. Nothing. My fingers went cold. For 5 full minutes, I just stared at the screen, blinking. Surely this was a mistake. Surely someone had forgotten to add me by accident. It happens, right? People overlook. People get busy. I refreshed. Checked spam. Nothing. My chest tightened, not from rage, not even sadness. From confirmation. The kind you don't want but can't ignore. The kind that wraps around you like a weighted blanket soaked in ice. I opened Instagram. Mallory, my cousin, had already posted a photo from the reunion planning brunch. Naomi had said that phrase sounded like a wasp exorcism. Now I understood what she meant. The picture showed my mom, Evelyn, Aunt Diane, and Mallory sitting on a country club patio sipping rosé, all in soft pastels. The caption read, plotting the Hale reunion, I number family first, family first. I laughed. Or maybe it was more of a dry cough. I sat back on my futon, paint splattered and threadbare, and stared at the mural I'd painted on the far wall, sunflowers climbing up from the floorboards, big and bold. Back then, I still thought being different was a virtue. I opened my email and started typing. Subject, quick question, to mom.hale@gmail.com, message. Hey mom, hope you're well. Just wondering, I saw the reunion info. Did I miss an invite? Love, Jay. I hit send. It took her 20 minutes to reply. Fast enough to know she'd seen it immediately. Slow enough to be calculated. From mom, subject, quick question. Hi sweetie, not sure. Maybe your grandmother thought you'd be uncomfortable. You know how big groups get sometimes. Love you, mom. I read it once. Then, again slower. There it was, that subtle slice buried in fluff. They didn't forget me, they excluded me. And they wanted me to feel like I had opted out of my own family. It was manipulative. And practiced. Naomi messaged me a few hours later. Naomi just found out I wasn't invited to Leah's wedding. Not even a courtesy text. Her mom hugged me in church last month. Me, same. My family's pretending I don't exist. She sent a broken heart emoji, followed by a gif of a woman flipping a table. I smiled just a little. Naomi always knew how to throw shade in the dark, but the smile didn't last. That night, I opened a folder on my desktop. I named it Proof. Into it, I dragged a screenshot of the email, the Instagram post, Mom's reply. I found the text from Naomi and saved that too. I didn't know why I did it, only that I had to. My fingers moved on their own like I'd done this before. And the truth is, I had. I'd always kept receipts. Quietly, unconsciously. But now it became a ritual. A defense. If they wanted to gaslight me into oblivion, I needed to leave breadcrumbs back to the truth. The folder became my talisman. My therapist would later call it a trauma archive, but I didn't have that language back then. I just knew I needed to not feel crazy. I began scrolling through old group photos online, birthdays, holidays, graduations. In so many of them, I was simply absent. And not just in person, but in caption, in comment, in context. I had become a ghost with a heartbeat. Even worse, no one ever called. No missed calls. No "how are you" voicemails. No Christmas cards. Not even passive-aggressive forwards from Diane. The silence had gone from weird to expected to permanent. One night, I sat on the kitchen floor with Naomi after a failed audition and a rejection email from a gallery in Portland. We shared cold ramen from one bowl and traded rejections like baseball cards. I told her about the folder. I think I'm becoming obsessed with saving every time they forget me, I said, blinking against the sting in my throat. Naomi shook her head. Not obsession, she said softly. It's proof you existed. That you tried. That was the difference. I wasn't saving bitterness. I was saving evidence. Because the worst kind of abandonment is the kind dressed up as concern. We just didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. We didn't think you'd be interested. You're always so sensitive. They weren't insults, they were erasers. Applied slowly and thoroughly like primer before painting over a wall. And it worked almost. But something in me refused to vanish. The apartment had walls so thin we could hear the neighbor's cat sneeze. Twice. Every morning. Like clockwork. It smelled like old paint, damp wood, and the ghost of past tenants. The ceiling in the kitchen peeled a little more each winter, and the radiator in the bedroom coughed like a retired smoker. But Naomi called it a sanctuary of creative filth, and somehow that made it bearable. We moved in on a gray Monday in February. Rent-controlled 4th floor, no elevator. 2 rooms, 1 bath, and a hallway wide enough to do a pirouette if you didn't swing your arms. To anyone else, it was a pit stop on the way to somewhere better. But for us, it was a beginning. The first night we sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, backs against our respective suitcases, sharing a lukewarm cup of tea from a chipped mug. It wasn't symbolic, just the only mug we hadn't broken in the move. Naomi raised her tea in a toast. To no family drama. From now on, it's just us. I lifted mine, clinking gently. We're our own blood now, I said. And we were. She never asked what exactly happened between me and the Hales. I never asked about the scar curling around her wrist, the one she never covered when she wore tank tops. We both knew. In different houses on different holidays, someone had decided we were too much, too strange, too inconvenient. That was all the explanation we ever needed. Naomi was a playwright then. Or trying to be. She spent her mornings in cafe corners scribbling dialogue on napkins and receipt backs, and her evenings in dusty basements, auditioning actors with big dreams and bad headshots. I was chasing gallery submissions like lottery tickets. Most of my work at the time was made from discarded things: door hinges, window frames, bent silverware. I told people I was elevating the overlooked, but the truth was I couldn't afford new materials. Sometimes we joked that we were running a performance art piece called Surviving in Reverse. Dinner was often ramen dressed up with half an egg or a handful of wilted spinach if we were feeling luxurious. Some nights we played a game: trade rejections. Whoever got the worst email that day won the last croissant. Me, thank you for your submission, but your work lacks thematic cohesion and emotional accessibility. Naomi. We regret to inform you your play does not meet our current programming needs. Good luck. Me, ouch. That's a tie. There was one night it was raining hard, the kind of sideways rain that finds you even under an umbrella, when Naomi came home soaked mascara bleeding into tear trails. She slammed the door behind her and dropped her bag like it offended her. "Still invited," she muttered. "As long as I don't bring Sam." I looked up from the floor where I was reorganizing a pile of metal scraps into something vaguely sculptural. "Who? My sister. Wedding next month. But Sam can't come. Can't ruin the family photos." I didn't ask if she was going. Instead, I grabbed the thickest blanket in the apartment and wrapped it around her shoulders like a crown. She whispered through chattering teeth, "You ever feel like they just want you to disappear?" "Every day," I said. We sat in silence after that. Not the kind that fills a void, but the kind that affirms something solid. That we weren't delusional. We weren't dramatic. We were just unwanted. And surviving anyway. In that apartment, we built a language only we spoke. Sometimes it was real words. Red folder meant we needed a distraction. Laundry day meant anxiety spiral incoming. Pizza night meant one of us had a minor win. But other times it was actions. Naomi left a post-it note with a doodle of a sunflower on the mirror the week I didn't get into a residency. I hung her plays flyer on the fridge, even though the ink smudged every time we grabbed milk. No one else had to believe in us. We did. That was enough. One night I came home late from my side job at a framing shop. Naomi was already asleep, curled like a comma on the futon, her laptop still glowing with half a script. On the wall behind her, she had tacked up one of my earlier pieces, a twisted spoon welded to a rusted clock gear. She'd labeled it, "This is what survival looks like." That moment, more than any gallery, any feature, any collector, was the first time I felt seen. The world didn't notice what we were building. But we did. And in a city of 8 million people, that was something. People like to romanticize New York. The lights, the energy, the ambition. They forget to mention the mildew, the loneliness, the way rejection hangs in the air like smog. But there, in that creaking little shoebox of an apartment, we found something most people spend decades searching for. A home that wasn't about bloodline, a bond that wasn't built on duty, a family that didn't demand you shrink to fit. Chosen family isn't just a warm idea. It's a rebellion. And we were rebels. Tired, broke, hungry, but never invisible to each other. It started with one screenshot, just one. The email about the family reunion, the one where everyone's name was mentioned except mine. It should have felt like a glitch, like something I could laugh off and forgive. But when I zoomed in on the subject line, the phrasing, the names so carefully listed, I felt my stomach turn in that slow, unmistakable way you feel when a truth you didn't want finally settles in. That was the first file I saved. I didn't know it was the beginning of a ritual. But it was. I created a folder on my desktop and labeled it proof. Not family stuff, not receipts, not even reunion drama, proof. As in, this happened, I wasn't crazy, I didn't imagine it. As in, this is how silence can be sharp. At first it was just emails. The reunion one. The wedding invite Naomi never got. The reply from my mom about maybe grandma thought you'd be uncomfortable. But then I started noticing other things. Photos from the family Facebook group, pictures of holidays, backyard dinners, birthdays I'd forgotten to be invited to. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't even mentioned. Even in comments, it was like I didn't exist. I saved screenshots, cropped them tight, labeled them with the date and the occasion. Brandon_BBQ_May 2016.jpg Thanksgiving group chat 2017. PDF Diane text, Christmas brunch, missing me, docs. I thought, maybe this is overkill. But I couldn't stop. One day I opened a drawer and found a Christmas card I'd sent to my mother the year before, addressed carefully in my own handwriting, sealed with a gold foil sticker. It had been returned to sender. Unopened. Stamped in red ink, no longer at this address. But I knew better. She still lived there. The handwriting hadn't changed. The same cursive swirl on the mailbox, the same shadow of curtains I saw when I passed by that one time in December just to prove to myself it was real. They didn't move. They just marked me as undeliverable. That envelope went into the folder too. I remember holding it in my hands that night, still cold from the mailbox, and whispering to myself, I'm not imagining this. I needed to hear it. Out loud. Because that's what families like mine do best, make you question what you know happened. Maybe you're overthinking it. Are you sure they meant it that way? You've always been a little sensitive. Those weren't conversations. They were erasures. Gaslightings dressed as gentle concern. Affection with an undertow of invalidation. And so I kept saving. The proof folder became a kind of therapy. A mirror. A map. A tether. Something I could open when my chest tightened and the memories started to whisper. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Because it was. It was. It just didn't leave bruises anyone else could see. One night Naomi walked into my room while I was scanning an old photo from my cousin's baby shower. The one where I took the picture but somehow wasn't in a single frame. She leaned over my shoulder and read the file name, erasure_photoseries6.jpg. You okay? She asked. No, I said, still staring at the screen. But I will be. She didn't ask more. Just placed a mug of tea beside me and left the door open. That was the thing about chosen family, they didn't force you to perform pain. They just showed up. I began backing up the folder to multiple places: cloud, hard drive, USB stick taped behind a painting. Sometimes I thought, what am I even going to do with all this? But that question never mattered as much as the reason I started. So no one, not even myself, could erase what had been done. I needed to be able to say, this is where it started. This is how it grew. This is how they tried to disappear me inch by polite inch. Every text that read, oh, we thought you were busy. Every event I found out about after it happened. Every time I was the last to know or never knew at all. I collected it. And each file I added made the silence heavier but also clearer. One night I stared at the folder icon, pulse racing, and whispered to myself, this is the closest I've ever come to believing myself. That's the most dangerous thing silence does. It teaches you to doubt your memory. It reshapes your past like fog over glass until you're not sure what happened or what you just felt happened. But proof cuts through fog. One day Naomi and I were sitting on the roof of our building, wrapped in thrift store blankets, drinking boxed wine from coffee mugs. The sun had set behind Manhattan and the skyline was lit like it was whispering secrets. I told her I wanted to confront them. Not with screaming, not with blame. But with this folder. She didn't ask me what I hoped to get from it. Didn't ask what I expected them to say. Instead, she said, if nothing else, they'll finally see what they worked so hard not to. I looked at the folder again, glowing faintly on my laptop screen, and for the first time I didn't feel wounded looking at it. I felt ready. Not for revenge. For truth. Because there's something sacred about documenting your own erasure. It turns the narrative. It reclaims the silence. It says, you may have left me out of the story, but I've kept the receipts. And one day I'll tell it myself. It happened in a gallery, of course. Where else would a new chapter begin for someone like me? The show wasn't mine. I was just assisting, setting up another artist's installation, something minimalist and conceptual, the kind of work that made you tilt your head and lie about what it meant. I was adjusting the angle of a spotlight when I saw him. Elliot. He stood in front of one of my pieces, tucked in the corner, a charred oil painting of a dining room with no chairs. I hadn't named it yet. I never meant for it to be in the exhibit. The curator added it last minute, probably as filler, but he stared at it longer than anyone else had all night. I waited for the usual questions. Is this about your family? Why no chairs? Did something happen at dinner? But Elliot just said, I get it. Then silence. No follow-up. No performance. Just quiet understanding. It startled me more than any compliment could. He didn't need an explanation. He didn't want one. He just saw it. And saw me. We got drinks the next week. Not wine. Not cocktails. Just black coffee at a half-empty diner in the East Village. He wore a soft gray sweater and carried a leather notebook he never opened. We talked about books. About silence. About how architecture and sculpture weren't that different, both shaped by space and weight and absence. He asked questions with his eyes more than his mouth. He listened like someone who knew the cost of being ignored. He didn't flinch when I mentioned Naomi. Didn't blink when I described the proof folder. Didn't try to fix it. Just nodded and said, "Sometimes the record matters more than the people." And that was enough. That winter, everything changed. Naomi's play was picked up by a small but gutsy off-Broadway company. She got to direct it herself. The cast was green, the set was recycled, but on opening night the audience gave them a standing ovation. I cried through the entire second act, and I sold 3 pieces, not to friends or family. Not through favors. Real collectors. Real sales. Real money. It wasn't much. But it was enough. Enough to quit my framing job. Enough to stop holding my breath. Enough to imagine a different kind of future. One with chairs, one with walls I chose, one with doors that opened only when I turned the handle. I started looking at land. Not because I believed I could afford it, but because I needed to stand somewhere that wasn't borrowed. The first few places were laughable muddy lots beside power lines, overpriced patches of gravel. But then I found it. A narrow strip of lakefront land just outside the city, nearly forgotten. The listing had been up for months. Too small for a developer. Too expensive for a camper. Just right for a woman with steel in her spine and a sketchbook full of impossible lines. I put in an offer the next day. Naomi screamed when I told her. Elliot just smiled and said, "It's about time the land got lucky." Designing the house became my obsession. Every detail mattered. Windows that caught the morning light just right. Floors warm enough to walk barefoot in January. A fireplace made of salvaged brick, one from every apartment I'd ever lived in. I built the table first. Before the walls, before the permits even cleared. 7 feet long. Dark oak and iron. Smooth in the center. Scarred at the edges. A table for the meals I hadn't been invited to. For the holidays I'd spent explaining my absence to no one. For the future I was finally claiming. Naomi called it the war table. I called it mine. Elliot helped with the structural layout. He drew curves where others saw corners. He believed houses could breathe. We'd sit on the unfinished deck some evenings drinking wine from jam jars, watching the sunset smear itself across the water like a poem. I remember saying, "They said I'd never have anything like this." He didn't ask who they were. He just looked at me and said, "Then let them see it." Not with arrogance, not with vengeance, but with truth. Because here's the thing about being shut out. You can either spend your life knocking on a door that will never open, or you can build a new house, with your name on the deed, and your own damn key. The house took a year. Not long, but long enough to wrestle with old ghosts. Every tile, every beam, every paint stroke was a confrontation. Every decision whispered, "This is yours now, this belongs to no one else." Naomi and I moved in on a warm Friday in late spring. We didn't throw a party, just unpacked slowly, opened all the windows, and played Aretha Franklin on repeat. She stood in the foyer, spinning in place, arms wide. "Girl, we're living in a Vogue spread," she laughed. Or a feminist sci-fi reboot. Either way, I'm obsessed. I looked around. The curved staircase. The copper light fixtures. The sculpture I welded from my old radiator pipes hanging above the fireplace. This wasn't revenge, this was reclamation. This was what it looked like to begin again. Not as a daughter. Not as a disappointment. But as a woman who had learned to build a life from the very silence meant to erase her. And for the first time I didn't feel like I needed a seat at their table. Because I had finally built my own. The knock didn't come with thunder. It didn't crash or cry. It came like everything else they ever gave me, soft, measured, just polite enough to hurt. It had been 5 years. 5 whole years since I last saw any of their faces in person. 5 years since a voicemail on my birthday that began with, "Sorry, things got busy," and ended with a tone that sounded suspiciously like relief. 5 years of silence so deep it became a second language. But somehow I knew the sound of that doorbell. I knew the moment my finger froze mid-scroll on my phone. I knew when Naomi glanced up from her laptop, brow raised. She knew too. I didn't say anything. Just stood. Set down the mug of tea I hadn't touched. And walked toward the door. Naomi followed silently. Not close, not hovering, just present. When I reached the threshold, I didn't open it right away. Instead, I tapped the security screen. There they were. Evelyn, my mother, in cream slacks and a pearl blouse. Aunt Diane clutching a gift bag so new it still had a price tag dangling from the handle. And Brandon, my brother, tie crooked like he'd dressed in a rush or regret. 3 people. 3 ghosts. Dressed in pastels like forgiveness was a costume. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I just watched. Naomi's phone was already in her hand, camera open but low. She didn't need instruction. She understood that this wasn't about proof. Not anymore. It was about remembering for me, not for them. I opened the door slowly. The late afternoon sun poured in behind me, casting them in a flattering glow they hadn't earned. They blinked. I waited. Well, Evelyn said, her voice just as warm, just as rehearsed as I remembered. Look at you. All grown up. I didn't answer. Didn't smile, didn't break. Come in, I said, stepping aside. The marble floor didn't creak under their feet. It just observed like the house itself knew who belonged and who didn't. They filed in like royalty on borrowed time. Diane's eyes danced across the foyer, landing on the sculpture above the fireplace, twisted metal and soft shadows. How bold, she offered. I nodded once. Evelyn touched a glass panel on the stair rail, fingers delicate like a museum patron. This is impressive, Jolie, she said, as if reading from a script titled How to Re-Enter Your Daughter's Life Without Apologizing. Brandon stayed silent longer, then finally said, I didn't know you'd do all this. Neither did you, I replied. He winced but said nothing more. Naomi stood just out of sight, but I knew she was watching. Not because she didn't trust me, but because sometimes silence needs witnesses. We walked into the living room. They moved slowly, as if unsure where to sit or if they were allowed to. I didn't offer directions. I didn't pour drinks. I let them feel the unfamiliarity, let them feel the edge of the table I had built. Evelyn finally spoke again. It's nice to see you've found your place in the world. I smiled, but not for her. Funny. I never lost it. Just had to claim it without permission. Diane forced a laugh. Oh, Jolie, always the wordsmith. Then she offered the gift bag, practically thrusting it into my hands. Something small. From Neiman's, Brandon's daughter picked it out. She's actually interested in art now. Can you believe it? I looked at the bag, then at her. I can believe she exists. I can't believe that's your opening line. Diane flushed, her grip tightening on the strap of her purse. Evelyn pivoted fast and fluid. We heard Nathan's graduation is coming up. We thought maybe you'd want to be involved. I blinked. Nathan. I hadn't heard that name in 6 years, not since the last group text I wasn't on. Not since he sent me a one-word reply to my hand-painted birthday card. Thanks. I took a step closer, my voice low. Drifting is what leaves do in autumn. What you did was exile. For the first time, Evelyn faltered. Just a flicker. A micro-expression of varnish cracking. Well, she said, tone tighter now. Water under the bridge. Dear. We're all here now, aren't we? That has to mean something. Naomi's voice rang out from the hall. Depends which way the water's flowing, don't you think? They froze. Classic Naomi. Evelyn ignored her. Brandon looked at the floor. Diane coughed into her palm. I folded my arms. So why now, I asked. Why this house? This day, this version of me? No one answered. Because they couldn't say we came when it looked safe. We came when the house looked expensive. We came because we realized we couldn't write you out forever. But I saw it in their eyes. They weren't here for me. They were here for proximity to what I'd built after they'd told me not to build it. Evelyn smoothed her blouse. You've always had spirit. Even as a child you never quite blended in. But maybe that was your charm. You mean defect, I said. Say what you mean. She didn't. She never did. The silence swelled again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they didn't say. Here's what I've learned. Not everyone who returns deserves a seat at your table. Sometimes the door stays locked for a reason. And sometimes, just sometimes you open it not to let them in but to show them what they left behind. Dinner was polite. The kind of politeness that suffocates. Naomi plated the lasagna she had made the night before, slicing clean squares like she was performing surgery. Elliot poured wine with slow precision, filling only half the glasses. The table, the one I built, was gleaming as if it too had been waiting for this moment. Brandon talked about traffic. Diane complimented the chairs. Evelyn smiled so tight I could see the fine lines fighting to hold their formation. Nobody asked why they were really here. Nobody asked why they stayed away so long. And I let them sit in the silence they created. Naomi didn't speak much, but I could feel her presence like armor. Elliot sat to my right, his hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. That was all the reassurance I needed. Halfway through dinner, I stood up. "I want to show you something," I said calmly. I placed my wineglass on the table with a muted clink, walked to the far end of the room, and tapped the tablet connected to the projector. The screen lit up. The slideshow began. First slide, a screenshot of the family email thread. Subject: Hale Lancaster Reunion 2014, every name listed, except mine. Next, Evelyn's reply to Brandon. "Let's keep it small, you know who has always been disruptive." Then a photo from that same weekend. A garden party under string lights. Caption: Family First. I was the one who took that photo. I was not in it. The room stiffened. Brandon shifted in his seat. Diane's fork paused midair. Naomi leaned casually against the doorframe, arms folded, eyes locked on the screen like a gallery judge. I kept going. Slide after slide returned to cinder envelopes. Christmas group chats I was never part of. A wedding program where my name was nowhere to be found. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply narrated. "These are timestamps," I said. "These are the receipts. These are your words, your silence, your choices." The next slide was a text exchange. Naomi and me 3 years ago. She had just found out she wasn't invited to a cousin's wedding. Naomi had replied, "We're our own blood now." I paused. Let the room absorb that. Diane finally broke. I don't think this is fair," she said, voice shaking. "That was never intentional." Naomi let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "Oh, please." Evelyn's voice cut and smooth, deliberate. "We did what we had to. You were unstable. You painted your dorm windows black. You isolated yourself." My jaw tightened. That, Naomi snapped, was an award-winning installation. It was featured in Modern American Expressionism. Evelyn looked at her like she was a bug on glass. I tapped the next slide. Audio waveform. A transcription appeared beside it. Evelyn's voice. "The city's changing fast, isn't it? I imagine your connections must be quite useful with all these developers swarming the lakefront." The room dropped 10 degrees. Brandon's eyes flicked toward Evelyn. "Mom," he whispered. But Evelyn didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward, folded her napkin, and said, "You'll regret this, Jolie." I turned to her. Met her eyes full on. "I already regret ever believing you were family." Silence, heavy, dense, real. Not the kind that erases, the kind that marks. Here's the thing about justice. It doesn't have to yell. It doesn't need spectacle, it just needs to be seen. And in that room, for the first time in years, they saw. Not the version of me they constructed. Not the disruptive daughter or emotional artist they whispered about behind wine glasses. They saw me. The one who built her life from ash and steel. The one who didn't disappear when they stopped looking. The one who kept every receipt. Not for revenge, but for remembrance. Evelyn stood slowly, purse in hand. "You've made your point," she said, tone icy. "We'll leave." "No one's stopping you," I replied. Diane hesitated. Brandon looked down. Neither said goodbye. They left the same way they came in, quietly, carefully, with pastel faces that had cracked around the edges. Naomi followed them to the door, locking it softly after they exited. I stood at the window for a long time after watching the sun slip behind the lake. The light turned gold, then amber, then disappeared entirely. Behind me, Naomi whispered, "That wasn't just closure. That was legacy." The knock at the side door came just after sunrise. Not loud, not desperate. Just tentative. Almost hopeful. I had been upstairs in the studio, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold, watching morning light bloom over the lake like a soft promise. When I opened the door, Brandon stood there. But this time he wasn't alone. Beside him was a young girl no older than 8, holding a sketchbook against her chest like it was armor and treasure all at once. She had unruly curls and deep, watchful eyes. The kind of gaze that notices everything and forgets nothing. Brandon looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but emotionally. Like the air around him had softened, deflated by time and truth. He wore no tie, no mask. Just a hoodie and sneakers, and a quietness I hadn't seen in him since we were children. "Hi," he said. I nodded. Nothing more. "This is Emma," he added. "My daughter. She asked to come." The girl tilted her head. "Are you the one who built this house?" Her voice was clear, curious, not shy. A small hand clutched the spine of her sketchbook tighter, as if afraid the question might offend me. I blinked. "I am." She opened the sketchbook. On the first page was a drawing done in bold crayon lines of a glass house perched by a lake surrounded by crooked trees and wildflowers. Standing in front of the house was a tall figure with wild hair and sparks coming out of her hands. "That's you," she said. "You look like a hero." The words stopped something inside me, not broke, just paused. No one had ever called me that before. Not in words. Not in the pure, unquestioning way only a child could believe. From behind me, Naomi appeared at the top of the stairs, stretching hair a tangled halo. Her voice was still sleepy when she murmured, "Damn right she does." I knelt down eye to eye with Emma. "Do you like drawing?" I asked. She nodded fiercely. "I draw everything. People. Houses. Mostly trees, though. Trees don't mind if they look weird." I smiled. "I like trees for that same reason." I reached into a nearby drawer and pulled out a slim black box tied with a red ribbon. "These are for you." Emma took it with reverence. Slowly, like it might vanish if she moved too fast. She untied the ribbon, opened the lid, and gasped. Inside was a full set of graphite pencils, real ones. The kind professionals use, the kind I didn't touch until I was almost 20. Her eyes widened like she'd just discovered stars were real. "Thank you," she whispered. "Make things that speak even when you don't," I said. She nodded, then ran over to Naomi, who knelt beside her on the patio and immediately began flipping through the rest of her sketchbook like it was a portfolio review. That left Brandon and me. Alone. Finally. He stood in silence for a moment, not meeting my eyes. Just watching the sunlight ripple on the lake, his hands were deep in his pockets. His shoulders rose then dropped like a breath he'd been holding for years. "I won't speak for them," he said. "I didn't ask you to." "I know." He looked at me then. Really looked. I needed to say I'm sorry. I said nothing. Not out of anger. Just to let the words breathe. Brandon continued slower now. "Not just for not saying anything back then, but for pretending you weren't there. For deleting you from conversations because it was easier than standing up." He swallowed. "It was cowardice. And I knew it." I studied him. Not the face of a brother I had lost, but a man trying clumsily to repair a bridge he let rot. "I appreciate you saying it," I said, "but I haven't been waiting for it." "I know." He turned his gaze toward the house. "She's seen your art online, you know. Emma. She was the one who found your gallery profile. Said your sculptures looked like angry flowers. She meant it as a compliment. She has good taste." Brandon smiled just barely. "She wants to be like you." Even before she knew we were related. That was the part that surprised me. That someone so untouched by all the history, by all the hurt, could still see me clearly. "She'll grow up knowing the truth," he said. "I'll make sure of it." I looked at him. "No," I said softly. "Make sure she grows up asking for it." He blinked. And for the first time I think he understood. Truth doesn't live in declarations. It lives in curiosity. In courage. In refusing to settle for silence. That night I stood in the studio again. The walls were covered in works-in-progress pieces half-formed like thoughts still becoming language. Downstairs, I could hear Naomi's laughter mixing with Emma's as they made pancakes in the dark. I thought of all the times I'd imagined a different kind of family, and how, despite everything, I'd ended up creating one anyway. On the corkboard above my desk was a pinned note: the Sienna Project. A home for artists without homes. 10 scholarships. 3 residencies. One stubborn belief that people left behind deserve front-row seats to their own future. Brandon's apology wasn't what changed me. Emma's drawing did. That crayon figure, tall and bright, standing before a house built from doubt and defiance, that was me. That was how she saw me. And for the first time in years, I saw myself the same way. Because sometimes the loudest recognition doesn't come from the ones who hurt you. It comes from the ones who never had a reason to lie. They asked me once why I didn't name it the Jolie Foundation. I smiled. Because that wasn't the name of the girl they erased. That wasn't the name of the child who sat cross-legged on a paint-stained futon reading rejection letters under string lights. That wasn't the name of the daughter who searched group chats for a message that never came. That girl was Sienna. Sienna was the version of me they tried to forget. So I made sure she'd be the one the world remembered. The Sienna Project began as a line in my notebook. A scribbled idea in the margins of a grocery list. A space for artists no one saves. I didn't know then that it would become a movement. I only knew what I'd needed at 16. At 22. At every age where the only thing louder than my ambition was the silence from the people who were supposed to believe in me. So I created the thing I never got. We announced the first 10 scholarships quietly with no press release or gala. Just a single post on a white background. For the ones who were told to dim their light, come shine here. The applications poured in. Some from college dorms, some from women in their 40s who had hidden their art like a secret affair. One came handwritten, accompanied by a drawing of a girl and a birdcage split open. Naomi read every single one. She cried through half. Jolie, she whispered, eyes glassy, we're building the future from the children they tried to erase. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I just reached for her hand and squeezed. Elliot came in with blueprints. He had designed a creative hub that breathed light-filled studios, rotating gallery walls, and a courtyard where sculptures could rise like wildflowers. There would be a black box theater for Naomi's workshop performances, a ceramic lab, and a quiet library just for sketchbooks. We broke ground in fall. Emma helped with the first ceremonial dig, holding a tiny golden shovel with both hands like it was Excalibur. When the camera flashed, she whispered to me, "This place feels like a giant art hug." I laughed, but she wasn't wrong. We opened the doors 8 months later. The morning we launched, Naomi walked into my studio with 2 mugs and a look that meant business. "You're not doing this part quietly," she said. "This part, the naming. The story. People need to know why it's called the Sienna Project." I hesitated. Not because I was afraid of the name, but because I was afraid of being seen fully. "You're telling the world," she said, "that the part they tried to delete is the part you built everything on." She was right. So that night I posted a video. Black background, no music, just me. My name is Jolie. But this isn't about me, it's about a girl named Sienna. She was told she was too sensitive, too loud, too strange. She was erased from group photos, email chains, and dinner tables. She was never given a seat. So she built her own. The Sienna Project is for anyone who was told they had to shrink to be loved. Anyone who was told their colors were too much for the room. Here you don't need permission to create. Here we start with the assumption that you matter. I thought maybe 200 people would watch it. It hit 3 million views in 4 days. I started getting letters. From mothers of queer teens. From retired women rediscovering art after decades of domestic silence. From men who hid their poetry in garage toolboxes. From children who drew with sidewalk chalk and wrote, "Thank you for making space." We pinned them to a wall in the main hall, the Gratitude Gallery. And every day we added more. Sometimes I walk the building late at night. When all the artists have gone home and the lights are low and the floor still hums with footsteps, I stand in the center of the courtyard and look up. The stars above don't ask for belonging. They just shine. That's what we've become. Not a school. Not a charity. But a constellation of people who refuse to go dark. One afternoon, Emma brought a friend to visit. A shy girl named Lila who kept one hand in her pocket and the other on a spiral sketchbook covered in unicorn stickers. Emma introduced me like this. This is Jolie. She makes metal into magic. But before that she was Sienna. Sienna was magic too. Lila asked me if I ever wanted to quit. I told her the truth. Many times. But I remembered something. What quitting doesn't stop the world from erasing you. Creating does. She nodded slowly, then handed me a drawing. It was a doorway. Open wide. With people lined up to walk through. Above it she'd written Sienna's door never closes. That night I sat at my desk holding Lila's drawing and thought of all the doors that had shut in my face. All the invitations I never got. All the rooms that made me invisible. And then I looked around. At the house I built. The center we created. The lives now blooming like wild gardens. And I understood something. This was never revenge. This was revolution. Quiet, intentional, unapologetic. This wasn't about making them regret. This was about making myself proud. And honoring the version of me who needed this long before I ever knew how to build it. The voicemail came just after midnight. No fanfare. Just the sharp buzz of my phone lighting up the dark. Evelyn Lancaster. That name hadn't appeared on my screen in nearly 6 years. Still it glowed like a wound that hadn't scabbed over completely. One missed call. One voice message. 17 seconds. I sat upright in bed, not out of urgency but clarity. I knew what it was before I pressed play. I also knew I wouldn't need to listen twice. Jolie, it's your mother. I thought, maybe we could finally talk. Like adults. You've made your point, haven't you? Let's not carry this on forever. We're family. Call me back when you're ready. Click. No apology, no recognition of harm. Just an assumption that silence meant pause, not choice. I stared at the message. Then, without ceremony, I deleted it. Not with anger, with certainty. The next morning I stood barefoot on the porch wrapped in a shawl Naomi had knitted when we first moved in. The air was crisp with fall the lake still. Light danced off the surface like it didn't know how to be anything other than honest. Inside, Elliot was fixing a loose hinge on the gallery door. Naomi hummed in the kitchen brewing strong tea. Emma was drawing at the long table completely unaware of how healing her presence had become. I took a long sip from my mug and whispered to the wind. She doesn't have to understand me. I'm not here to be understood, I'm here to be whole. For so long I thought closure came from conversation. From someone else saying I'm sorry and meaning it. From finally hearing, you were right. From a hug, a tear, a grand confession. But I've learned something quieter. Closure is not their gift to give, it's mine to claim. And sometimes it looks like deleting a message, sometimes it looks like not replying. Sometimes it looks like living beautifully without them. I thought of the girl I used to be, Sienna. The one they said was too much. Too sensitive. Too loud. Too stubborn. She used to whisper into her pillow. Maybe next year they'll remember me. Now she stood in sunlight surrounded by things she had built from ashes. Not as revenge, but as return. To herself. Naomi found me on the porch an hour later. You okay? She asked. I nodded. Was it her I didn't have to say yes? Naomi knew. She always knew. I didn't listen all the way I lied. You don't have to. We stood in silence for a while, shoulder to shoulder. It was the kind of silence that didn't ask questions, only offered warmth. Then she nudged me gently. She still thinks this is a performance. That if she claps the curtain will rise again. I smiled. She's forgotten the show ended years ago. Later that afternoon, I watched Emma sketch in the courtyard. She was working on a series of doors, all styles, shapes, and colors. Some open, some locked. One had flowers growing through the hinges. What are you drawing? I asked. She looked up beaming. Portals. Where do they go? She shrugged. Wherever people need to go when they don't feel safe anymore. I sat beside her. Do you think you'll ever draw mine? Emma studied me thoughtful. I already did, she said. It's the one with light coming out. I blinked back the sting in my eyes and whispered. Good. I've kept that one open for a long time. She nodded. Not everyone gets in though, right? I looked at her. No, I said gently. Not everyone should. Inside the studio, a new sculpture stood half-finished. A woman carved from layers of recycled metal, hands open, face upward, and her feet rooted in stone. No name etched into her frame. Just a phrase at the base. You don't need to explain growth to the ones who buried the seed. That night I sat at my desk and read letters from strangers. They came from all over: emails, postcards, handwritten notes, folded like secrets. My father disowned me when I said I wanted to be a dancer. I followed your journey. I made my first stage this year in my garage. Thank you for giving me permission. Another read: I don't want to be invited anymore. I want to build my own tables. You taught me that was okay. I placed them carefully in a new folder on my shelf, labeled not proof this time, but echoes. The next day Naomi asked if I wanted to respond to Evelyn. Just to close the loop, she said. I shook my head. I already did. She raised an eyebrow. By saying nothing. By saying everything. I've learned that silence isn't always absence. Sometimes silence is authorship. The choice to no longer narrate with the voices that harmed you. The courage to continue writing without needing validation. They say family is blood. But I've come to believe family is whoever keeps showing up when the silence gets loud. And as for Evelyn, let her calm. Let her call. Let her write. But let her know this story moved on without her. And in that moving on, not in confrontation, not in applause, but in becoming, I found the only closure that ever mattered. Not everyone gets to understand you, but you must always understand yourself. That's the final chapter. That's the locked door. That's the piece that never needed a knock.